can learn more about this film at collidingdreamsthemovie.com. And if you haven't, anyway, what I first wanted to do after that introduction is just introduce John Ruskay, who was an early believer in our film. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to what was it in the film that you responded to.
Good evening, Chag Sameach. I see many friends and colleagues near and far. So Chag Sameach. This is, in my view, both when I received the proposal and then when I watched the first film and the film itself, this is a magnificent, rich documentary on the emergence of Zionism, on many aspects of Israel, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as one who has studied this area, I'm always interested in subject matter. But what was so important to me about this documentary and why I think it's so important for American Jewry is its title itself is about colliding dreams. Colliding dreams, to be sure, among Zionists and Palestinians, but also within both Palestinians and particularly within the Zionist movement. Different dreams, different visions about what Israel or the Jewish homeland pre-48 could be and should be. Why do I think that's so important? Why do I think it's so actually urgent for North American Jewry now? I'll be brief. Pre-48, you weren't just a Zionist. You actually identified with a movement, whether it was the revisionists or Hashomer Tzir, just as two examples, which you'll see in the film, which had different visions about what the state to be created could be, should be, and might be. They differed on core issues: economics, socialist capitalist, religion, religious secular, actually, and Jewish state, binational state. That formed a rich and ultimately formed the multi-party system, which was Israel. So there was a rich debate. You didn't just say I'm a Zionist, you identified with a movement, and that reflected a vision of what the Jewish homeland could be and might be. After 48, particularly here in North America, we was attacked, we rallied around the flag, and it was, maybe it was the historical imperative to cheer. There was so much to cheer about, to write checks. But therefore, as I frame it, the conflation of Israel advocacy, mobilizing to stand with the people of Israel as they resist violence and in their pursuit of peace, and Israel education, which would help young and old develop their own views about what Israel can and should be. That was eliminated. We asked American Jewry to stand, cheer to all the incredible achievements and write checks. But that, in fact, denied, for young and old, the opportunity both to deal with the complex gray areas. Most of us are liberal nationalists. The Zionism that prevailed is a conservative nationalism. It preferences us, a group. One can deal with it, but you actually can't deal with it by ignoring it. And so mostly the focus on Israel advocacy, maybe it was needed, has actually left the community what I call intellectually naked. We need a huge commitment and investment in serious Israel education, helping young and old develop their own visions, their own dreams, different dreams of what Israel can and should be. We can talk about what those issues will be today. That's what this film captures. And therefore, in my view, it is an extraordinary contribution to what, both as a documentary, but also what is so needed now, if we're going to reverse the turn away, what some call distancing, etc., and in some ways, renew Zionism. That sounds anachronistic, outlandish. I believe if we're going to renew Zionism, we need to actually invest in people developing their own visions, their own colliding dreams. And as a community, we're going to need to tolerate, in fact, encourage that. I think that's why this film is, in addition to being a magnificent documentary, is so important at this time for the North American Jewish community. I commend both Oren and Joe. Joe, let's show some of the film, all right?
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to say something very brief because the idea is to show the film. The only thing I want to say in preparation for this, going off of what John said, is that we were very interested in allowing a lot of light and not just heat into the debate we have. So, often what you hear when you watch films on Zionism or about Israel or news are a lot of vituperation, a lot of argument, a lot of anger. We did not want to, we didn't want to leave out these varying viewpoints, as John said. It was fundamental to what we want to do with the film, but we hope that you watch them in the spirit of allowing everyone to have their say without getting too angry or too frustrated. I mean, it was very difficult for Oren and I when we made this film, initially when we were doing some of the interviews, to hear what people had to say. So one of the tasks we set ourselves, and I remember the first time I did an interview with a really lovely Palestinian man, very thoughtful man all of whose close friends were Jewish. And he said he did not believe there could be such a thing as a Jewish state without it being oppressive to Palestinians. And I remember how threatened I felt by that, how threatening a statement that was to me, just because this is such an existential issue for both sides. So as you'll see, what I'm going to start with is the very opening of the film. It's about 8 minutes, and you'll see some varying viewpoints, but the hope is not to provide you with answers. Everyone, I guess, has their own viewpoints, as John pointed out, but to hopefully help people to ask questions in a way that isn't as threatening, perhaps, as sometimes this issue can be. So I don't know if we accomplished that, but we certainly tried. I'm going to share my screen and show you the beginning of the film.
There's the Hebrew word Tikkun. Tikkun is a very spiritual word from the ancient Hebrew culture. It doesn't exist in any other language. Tikkun is a whole process that takes years. How do you reform yourself after you've been broken?
What Zionists wanted to do was to normalize Jewish existence, to put an end to this feeling of a gulf separating Jews and other people, to make us like other people, and to enable us to feel the kinship with other people that we hadn't felt in the past, because we were always super conscious of our differences. And Zionism, in this sense, was really an attempt to bring about a revolution in Jewish life. On the whole, I would have liked to see the Zionist revolution go further and succeed more.
I heard once somebody describing Zionism as a person escaping a burning building, jumping out of the window and falling on somebody else's head. I think that's a fair description of Zionism. I mean, it's materialized in a very critical moment, I think, in the Jewish history, but we never really dealt with the consequences.
A couple of years ago, my wife and I noticed lots of bulldozers on the hills there. And gradually we saw the outlines of these concrete slabs, and it eventually formed a wall. On the one hand, that wall has helped keep my children safe in the city. But it really represents the opposite of everything that I dream of in terms of Israel finding its place in the Middle East. That wall is a tragedy for both peoples, but I have no guilt for that wall. That wall did not have to be there.
If we are not here because of what's written in the Bible, if we are not here because this is the land that God promised to the Jewish people, then we have no good reason to live here. We are the soldiers of this messianic period in time. We have to win these wars. Nobody will win it for us. Then, when we will be able to win all the wars and to build the temple, then we will know that Messiah came.
Zionism succeeded in building a powerful country. It is the strongest militarily in the region. It has scientific achievements. It could draw on brains and mindsets from all over the world. And you could look at Israel and say it's a success story. Superficially it is, but where has it failed? It has failed because it existed on the negation of the Palestinians as human beings with rights, with a history, with a culture. It is extremely oppressive also because it is exclusive.
I still remember the years that coming from Israel was something that was envious. People will ask you about Israel, about the kibbutz, about the new reality, and it was very attractive and seemed so glamorous and so just and so worthy. And it turned into something people are shy about, and not speaking Hebrew on the train or not being identified as Israelis. And it's a sad moment for us. This is exactly what we didn't want to happen, and it's happening.
Zionism, the improbable idea of a state for the Jews in their biblical homeland, has held the world's attention for a century and a half. Since the birth of Israel in 1948, nearly half the world's Jews have made it their home and created a powerful democracy with a vibrant culture and thriving economy. Yet Zionism has given birth to competing visions, conflicting dreams, and it has aroused fierce criticism. Its very legitimacy more in question today than ever before. Behind the swirling emotions is the idea itself, its history, and the momentous transformation it has brought to Jewish life, to the Middle East, and to the world.
Thank you. This is Oren Rudavsky again. And we're going to take this opportunity to put up a poll question that you can respond to. And I also wanted to, and you're going to have, I think they give you a minute to do so. So I'm going to let you read this, and remember that you can also add chat comments. And we'd just love to hear your response to this. So I'm going to just be quiet for a minute. Okay, we've got another 10 seconds or so. So please respond in the next few seconds.
I'll give it another minute, another few seconds here, Oren.
Sure.
I think we're okay.
If we could get presidential votes to be at 80%, we'd be doing quite well.
Yeah.
The Zionism, okay, so the poll is closed, 86 votes. Joe, do you want to read these?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The overwhelming winner here with 77% of the vote was that it's a political Zionism with which people identify as a politically inspired movement. In second place with 19% is a cultural movement, and the bringing up the rear is a religiously inspired movement. I think one of the things that I find interesting about this, and maybe people can chat about this, is I wonder if the people who feel that it's primarily a cultural movement, does that mean that they would be willing to give up a fully Jewish state as long as whatever state existed as Israel or in the land of Israel allowed Jewish culture to flourish? I don't know if that's what's behind that answer as opposed to a politically inspired movement or not. It may not be, but it's interesting.
I guess it's also makes sense to read the whole of the question, a religiously inspired movement, one that has sought to reclaim our ancient biblical heritage and preserve, versus one which believes the Jewish people have a right to and a need for a state to ensure self-determination. Perhaps none of those completely contradict each other, but I just, in light of these comments, please feel free to add thoughts or questions related to this first poll. And there will be a second poll after this second clip. And I just wanted to shout out a tribute to a man who really inspired me in the making of this film. And the original title of the film was The Zionist Idea, which is Arthur Hertzberg. And Arthur Hertzberg's quite beautiful book, written probably now over 40 years ago, I would guess, spoke to the many versions of Zionism that existed in his day when he was growing up, and as in the days of my grandparents and my grandparents, who were very active in the Zionist movement in Brooklyn in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and beyond. Those people both inspired me with their dedication to Israel and their dedication to the idea of Jewish culture. The books my father grew up with at home were not books in English, they were books in Hebrew, and it was Zionist literature, and it led him to write Hebrew poetry for Hadoar at the age of 15. Just moving, I want to move to our next clip, and unfortunately we're only giving you pieces of this film, which we'll discuss after this second clip, which is about 1967. And I just think back to, I was 10 years old in 1967, and remember it's frankly my first real distinct memory of Israel at the Solomon Schechter School in Boston, where my Hebrew teacher, my second grade Hebrew teacher, was listening to transistor radio and crying. And that's how I found out, really. I knew about Israel from the little blue and white box that we would put money into every year, but I never knew how important it was to Jews all over the world. And that transformed my understanding of it to some degree. And just by way of setting up this clip further, in our film, Gershom Gorenberg speaks about 48, when Ben-Gurion, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, was given the opportunity. Yigal Allon, who was commander, said, "We can take it all. We can go past the borders we have now. We can take the entire West Bank. Should we do it?" And Ben-Gurion said, no, I want to guarantee that we have a majority Jewish state and one that can elect a democratically elected leadership. And that is where Israel was at, or Ben-Gurion was at in 48. Not everybody was there by a long shot. So we're entering the film at the beginning of 67, at the beginning of the war, and we'll talk afterwards. Thank you. Joe, you're putting up a clip, yes?
Oh, I'm sorry.
48 and 67.
I'm sorry. Let me just go back a little.
Between 48 and 67, there was no Zionism. Zionism succeeded, there is a state, and it became just common sense. And no one talked about Zionism anymore. 67 brought back Zionism as an issue and what it means, and reevaluation of the whole project, and the same problems that were pre-48 suddenly returned to the fore.
In May of 1967, after years of cross-border tensions, Egypt's President Nasser ordered UN peacekeeping forces to leave the Sinai. He sent his armored divisions to Israel's border and created a unified command with Syria and Jordan.
I was in 11th grade at a high school in Haifa when Nasser closed these straits and the Israeli paper talking about siege. The whole city became deserted in a matter of days. No young man in the streets. Everybody was recruited to the army.
I was 18. It happened right at the end of the last year in high school. My older brother and my father were in the army. I was the adult in the family. I remember I had to dig a shelter near the house in order that if we are bombed, we'll have somewhere to hide.
There are mass graves being dug in parks in Tel Aviv. The overwhelming sense is of impending doom, that we're back in that existential moment.
At the highest levels of the army, there was a great deal of confidence, as long as Israel struck first. But the public didn't know that.
Suddenly there it was, and I think it made me, as it made many people, just realize how important Israel was to me. I mean, that if Israel were to be destroyed, I think just my life would be destroyed. I don't think it would have had any meaning to me anymore.
In the pre-dawn hours of June 5th, Israel launched a surprise air attack against Egypt. Destroying the bulk of its air force in a single morning. Clashes with Syria followed.
We were listening, of course, to all the Arab stations that told us the Arab armies are liberating Palestine. So we thought that's what's going to happen.
Of course, every Palestinian, whether inside Israel, whether in the West Bank, whether in the Arab world, I mean, every Palestinian dreamed of victory.
On the third day of the war, the paratroopers came down from Mount Scopus and conquered the old city, the walled city of Jerusalem.
We were the first company on the Temple Mount. We went first to the Temple Mount and from there down to the Wailing Wall. 3 of our commanders went into the Golden Mosque and they put up an Israeli flag. And then Moshe Dayan, who was then Minister of Defense, came and said, very nice of you that you put on, take it down.
It was an extremely dramatic moment because we could hear on the radio the moment. Here I stand with the paratoppers, touching first the stones of the Wailing Wall. So you could live. I read later on reports and letters of soldiers who were in the Sinai, who were fighting near the Suez Canal and were fighting hard. There was a lot of casualties there too. But what they remember, this moment, the moment that they hear on the radio, the commander of the paratoppers saying, Har Habayit biyadai. That means the holy mount is in my hands.
Suddenly it was very quiet. The stream of casualties stopped, and the ongoing for 3 days, the noise of shells and bullets and sirens suddenly stopped at midday of Wednesday, June 8th, 1967.
The war was over the first day. The first few hours, the Israelis bombed the Egyptian planes and an airfield, and there's no war anymore. The war is just a matter of a few days. And we were shocked. We refused to believe it.
It was so swift, so quick, that many of those who even attempted to run away from the war found out that already the Israeli army was ahead of them. So they came back to their houses.
With the defeat in 67, the West Bank was occupied, Gaza was occupied, so now all of historic Palestine was under Israeli control.
נכנסנו לתוך הר הבית ועברתי במקום עזרת הנשים של בית המקדש. לא היה על מי לראות, כי הם יצאו. עוד היה הריח שלהם באוויר, של חיילי הליגיון, אבל הם לא היו. והמפקד שלי, אני מישיבת מרכז הרב קוק והוא מהשומר הצעיר. מי שיודע מה זה השומר הצעיר. והוא שאל אותי, יואל, מה אתה אומר עכשיו? ואמרתי לו, 2000 שנה נגמרו. הלוואי שנהיה ראויים לזה.
There was a sense of elation, ecstatic sense. People thought that miracles can happen, but I remember one of us refused to clean his rifle. He said, we won't need the rifles anymore.
I grew up totally secular. I was an atheist. I believed in Darwin. I believed in the liberation of the human mind. And I still believe today that way. But at that period of the 6 Days War, God was living in them. The Shekhinah was amongst them. And in this respect, I came closest to my way of understanding what a religion is.
Together with my father, we went to my godfather to tell him that Temple Mount is in our hand. The old city is liberated. The Wailing Wall is in our hand. And he told him, Rebbe, maybe the Messiah is coming. And Reb Aryeh Levin, an ultra-Orthodox Jew, told him, what do you mean he's coming? He's already here.
זה לא קרה עד אז בתנועה הציונית, זה לא קרה בכל שנות הגלות, זה לא קרה בימי בית שני, זה לא קרה בבית ראשון. מאז ימי דוד ושלמה לא הייתה אחדות לאומית כמו בששת הימים.
The war ended. It was full moon, quiet. Hebron was in our hands. People were terrified. They thought that we'll take revenge of what happened in 29. And suddenly, it's the thing which is the closest to a religious experience that people describe. I had this thing that came from nowhere. We are trapped. We are trapped.
I just was going to say a real quick thing before turning it over to you, John. Just, I wanted to relate one thing about this part of the film that isn't in this particular section, but comes just a moment after, which is what, you know, one of the things that's interesting about the Six-Day War, obviously, was the great unity of the Jewish people, as the people in the film talk about. One of the surprising things, I think, for Oren and I was when we spoke with a couple of Palestinian subjects. They talked about that even in defeat, there was a strong sense of unity among Palestinians, because all of a sudden, all those Palestinians who were in the West Bank, who were before this unable to call themselves Palestinians, who had to refer to themselves as Jordanians, suddenly were able to call themselves Palestinians and were able to connect with their Palestinian relatives and friends and neighbors in Israel proper. So it became a unifying moment for both peoples, oddly, and for different reasons. But as we all know, that ultimately this, in a kind of Shakespearean way, this unity for the Jews led to even more conflict post 67. So I wanted to ask you, John, why you think, how does a moment like this, such a beautiful, people, even secular Jews calling it a spiritual religious moment, how does that end up leading to such enormous conflict among Jews and then ultimately unity going forward among Palestinians? It's an odd turn of events.
Well, first of all, as I look at the participants, I'm one of the more senior people here, and to even begin to remember what it was, my first trip to Israel was in 1963, and then in 65. And Israel represented every positive value that one could have imagined. 67 takes place, and as you cite, and as you see in the film, and this is just a snippet, I hope you'll all watch the whole film. It's an extraordinarily rich film. There was the euphoria, there was the relief that was profound, there was the sense of we are one in a unique way. And as was cited here, you know, Dayan says, keep the degel off the kotel, take the flag down. Ben Gurion shortly thereafter says, leave the territories as quickly as possible. But of course, as the film reflects, the settlement enterprise, a transformation takes place. And I would say the conflict begins both in Israel and here, when what happened post 67 and really from the 70s on, mid 70s on, is that another narrative emerges. And it has emerged slowly, but both wider and wider segments hear a Palestinian narrative of how they experienced both the creation of the state and then the settlement enterprise, etc. And this is now going on for 50 plus years. So I say again, that this redoubles the value. There is a wonderful curriculum that's been developed, a teacher's guide for this film, and how this can be used to help people develop, again, their own views on today, You know, should there be two states? Should there be one state? Should there be confederation? When I was in my role at UJ Federation, and even today, I consider myself still delusionally not an educator. And therefore, I believe that the community would be healthier if we had more people who held the degel, who held the flag, and whether it be of the right, of Americans for Safe Israel, or the left, whether it's Shalom Achshav, or the left calling for one state and for two states, the community would be healthier, engagement would be deeper, we would have much more passion in the community about what it means at this point to be a Zionist. That is gone in a certain way. Excuse me, it's reemerging because the 50+ year of occupation has led to substantial disagreements, both in Israel and here, about core issues. But we as a community, in my view, have not yet caught up. This film and other people are beginning to get into this area, are beginning to realize, young and old, where there's plenty to applaud and celebrate on Yom Ha'atzmaut and other times. But we need to help young and old. This is not only a problem of the young. Really think through issues of religion, issues of democracy, issues of one state, two states, where this is going to be, not only for over there, the implications for the Jewish people are profound as well, as everyone on this who's watching this knows. So that's why this film is so rich, so important, and I want to encourage you, A, to view the whole film, but B, look at the curriculum. Many of you are connected to educational institutions. This needs and ought be connected to those institutions so they can begin that process of helping young and old renew and develop their own views, conflicting dreams about Israel, what it can be and should be.
You know, thank you, John. There are a few questions here. One of them is from David Wiener, and he asked, in 1967, how many of the Israeli people expected to return to the West Bank? I think it's an interesting question. Oren, do you want to take that? Do you want me to take that?
Well, I just wanted to invite people to ask questions, and if there's a way for them to actually be on screen, I'm happy to have that happen. And I don't have an answer to that question. I think that Palestinians, as the film alludes to, Palestinians in '67 were very eager to return and were able to return for a period of time freely. And if any of us of our age or older can remember, there was a period of time when in Israel, the borders were basically open. There was very little violence. It was truly a moment of euphoria. And in some ways, as one of the Palestinian speakers says, they were allowed to return to their families, to visit, not to stay, but to visit. And of course, there is a section of the film, which I wish we could show you, where you see Israelis of all stripes, secular and otherwise, going to the biblical sites. And this was something that I did, and I know I see Peter Geffen, who's on, mentioning that he was on one of the first planes as a volunteer to Israel at the time. And I'm sure that he probably went to those biblical sites. That was the experience for Jews who had religious or Jewish education, that of course you wanted to go to the graves of the patriarchs and to Jerusalem and to the Wailing Wall and to Hebron and to other places. Very few, however, went to settle or expected to be able to settle there, but they did that as well.
Well, you know, one of the things, just to follow up on what you're saying, again, I don't think we have any idea how many people wanted to return, but as Oren is pointing out here, you know, in many ways that something unexpected happened, right? The Israelis, even at that point, were not going to take the West Bank. It was because of the Jordanian attack, so there was no foresight that this would happen, much less that they would survive the war, at least as was said on the part of the people, if not the generals. But as Oren describes it here, what you had was this great return of the repressed, the religious repressed, for many left-wing, very secular settlers who were determined to create a national secular state, who created a new secular city like Tel Aviv, that this enormous return of religious emotion happened. And that created a short window. I mean, one of the things, I don't know if we actually talk about this in the film, but the very first impetus for settling came on the part of some very hard left-wingers, not just right-wingers. And very quickly, the left...
Just to jump in for a second,
yeah.
One of the most interesting parts of the film for me was the documentation of the early settlements, particularly in the post-73, in Sebastia, 75, I think it was, 76, and how these were idealists. And remember, this was with a labor government.
Right, exactly.
And many of the elder labor leaders had been so demoralized by 73 that they were excited and encouraged and moved by the idealism of those young people who were doing illegal settlements. It's a fascinating part of the film, which I hope you'll see.
Yeah,
exactly. I just wanted to be able to read some of people's comments, and they're certainly going in a certain direction, but I want to give them voice and also say the film can be, people have asked where they can rent the film, which is on Amazon, and it's at Kino Lorber Films, and our website again is Colliding Dreams, the movie. But I just want to read some of these comments. Not that I agree with, but just to read through them. Karina Barron, is it significant that one of the speakers refers to Gaza and the West Bank as now being under Israeli occupation, as if it didn't matter that prior to that it had been under Jordanian control? From Stephen Wallach, what is the Palestinian narrative regarding their repeated refusals to accept Israel's peace offers? Where can the curriculum be accessed, as I said, on the website, Colliding Dreams, the movie? Would there ever be a movie made by Palestinians that would be as sympathetic in reviewing history and past wars? I certainly want to answer that just quickly and say, I think so. There's some remarkable Palestinians out there. Can you speak to the arguments from some that imply the Palestinians are not civilized enough to deserve autonomy? I'm not going to touch that one. Sorry to clarify, is it perhaps because Palestinian people were upset that what they viewed, this is, sorry, Karina Barron, and the last one was David Fleischman. Sorry to clarify, is it perhaps because Palestinian people were upset that what they viewed as being their land was now being run by Jews rather than Muslims? And okay, that's just some of our, one more. What the Palestinians may consider their land is a complex question and doesn't seem to explain their refusals to compromise since 1948, Steve Wallach. The comments are killing me. That's Ann Ebersman. Go, Ann.
Can I, let's respond
yes.
to a little, let's respond a little to that. And I don't know if John also wants to, but you know, there's several questions about the Palestinians. I think that one person earlier had asked about the Palestinian narrative, about the many refusals to all the peace plans. And I'll be honest about my own point of view, and I'll let John and Oren speak for themselves. But you know, we met some remarkable Palestinians in making the film, and there are some remarkable and open Palestinians. I have to confess my own frustration in a lot of ways in terms of the Palestinian rejections of some of the peace plans, not all of them. So I think that there's I certainly share an ambivalence, but a hope and an openness that something may change in the future. And I frankly don't know if it will, and I have a certain amount of despair. But what we did with this film was hopefully to make a film again that wouldn't touch on the political so much, even though obviously that's fundamental, but just to hear Palestinian voices, to hear their reactions, to hear reasonable reactions that one might not agree with. But our own openness doesn't necessarily mean, at least again, I don't want to speak for John and Oren, a certain blindness to, or frustration on the part of myself as a Jew to what's happening on the other side. I don't know, John.
Sorry.
John, go ahead, John.
We have only a few minutes. I know they're going to go to a next session. There's a lot to say here. I think this film is more about the colliding dreams within the Zionist and the Jewish world than it is about the Palestinians, although some Palestinian voices are heard. But that said, my own view, this is no longer, I too share the disappointment that errors of all kinds have been made by Palestinian leadership, by Israeli leadership, etc. At a certain point, this is about what we as Jews and Jewish people, being with enormous power, are we going to be able to preserve Israel as a Jewish democratic state? That, in my view, is a presenting problem for us, and as given the power relationships in the region, that is a huge challenge that faces us today and moving forward, not so far down the road. And I'm no longer as concerned as I might have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago about Palestinians. I'm concerned about the nature of Israel, its very fabric as a culture, as a political entity, its integrity itself, and its implications on the Jewish world, including including the American Jewish community. And I think we need to get clearer, although, truth be said, in Israel, they are getting clearer. Therefore, the question for North American Jewry is, how are we going to relate to this and deal with this with all the complexity, with all the gray? Are we going to find serious ways to get into this, given the challenges we face?
Thank you, John. And I would just like to say one of the great speakers in our film, Moshe Halbertal, read everything he's ever written if you can understand it. And I just have to say, he was one of those idealists who went to Gush and back then. But then he realized the threat to Zionism. And we made this film not to settle these disputes, and I see the disputes on the screen. We made this film because the dream of Zionism, from my perspective, has to be revisited, has to be re-understood. And we have to find a way to embrace an Israel which we can love, and as somebody pointed out, as our children and grandchildren can love, not just because Tel Aviv is a fantastic city with great food and it's great to be able to speak Hebrew, but to love because the ideals of Zionism, the ideals of the Jewish people are at the heart of Israel as well. And that's why we made the film, is to re-ask these questions and to re-understand what the Zionist dream is. And I thank you all very much for participating in this. Please go to our website if you are interested and look at the study guide and look at the film, and let's come back next year and discuss it again, but in person. Halavai.